Okay guys, so today I am finally bringing you my take on a budget White Forest deck profile. I want to cover a few different things in this deck profile. I want to talk about the absolute core of the deck, so the things that you really have to play and what makes this deck function. I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of being limited to a budget. There actually are some upsides, funnily enough. And then I want to talk a little bit about what your strategy should be. Because every time you play a deck, you should have a game plan where you want to get to a certain board every single time. And because this is a 2-card combo deck, there are different ways of getting to the same board. I have a lot of combo videos that explain some of this stuff. Like I have a video that shows how to play around Droll and Nibiru, especially using Rafflesia. I have a video showing you how to make Appaloosa on Summon 5 without even using a normal summon. And I have a video that is talking a lot about deck ratios and math. So I highly recommend, if you want more info on this deck, even not including the broken stuff like Fiendsmith that is expensive, check out my other videos. Last thing I want to say before getting into this is there is a Discord, and so if you want to get feedback on your deck or talk to other people who are building this deck or other variants of it, join the Discord. I plan on doing some giveaways, and I plan on doing some events. The main one I want to do next is a White Forest variant tournament, but I've been too busy to start it so far, but that is coming soon. Okay, now let us begin by just being real and saying that the vast majority of the price of this entire deck is in 2 cards. A Stellar of the White Forest and Elzette of the White Forest. These are the secrets from info. Diabel is also a secret, but because it's a one-of, the card is not very expensive comparatively. You must play this card at 1. This is one of the only cards in the entire deck, besides a Stellar and Elzette, that is more than just like $1 or a couple dollars. So you can see here, even though I know that I'm just using the Omega's built-in calculator here, so this is not the most accurate thing in the world, but you go from $68 to putting in 2 Stellar and 2 Elzette all the way up to $166. And then if you put in the 3rd Stellar and the 3rd Elzette, you're at $215. So there is a pretty big difference between having these cards and not in terms of the cost of the deck. There is no replacement for them. If you cannot get your hand on all 6 of these cards, Stellar and Elzette, at least play 3 Prosperity. Okay, so now that that is done, there's basically nothing else here that is particularly expensive. I am opting to play 2 Bestials, and because the Druis Worm is, I think, one of the only Bestials or the only one that's more than a few dollars, I've opted to put in Baldrake as my second. If you already have access to Druis Worm, or this is not a problem for you, I would probably play Druis Worm over Baldrake. Or if you're playing 3, I would play 1 Magna, 1 Baldrake, 1 Druis. There are a lot of Yubel players on ladder in Omega, which is not a good matchup for us. And I almost want to play more of these. There are also a lot of Gimmick Puppet decks on Omega, which is honestly like just despicable. And Bestials are one of the cards that also hits that deck. So if you're mostly playing on Omega, then maybe consider playing more Bestials. But these cards in general are just solid. They're good for card economy, and they're other hand traps. In terms of other things, there isn't really anything else that is expensive. Almost every other card that I've shown here has been reprinted a bunch of times or is just very cheap. Like all the toy cards are just cents. Reinforcement of the Army is just to have more access to the toy stuff because it searches Soldier. You don't need to play more than 1 Tails, which is good news for budget players because this is one of the other cards that is more than a few dollars. You can play multiple Woes, but I don't think this is necessary because this is a brick going second. It's only really good if you're going first because drawing it means you don't have to search it, but that's not even like a good reason to play more of them. So I would say that this is like a relatively solid list in terms of the bare minimum. You can replace the 2 Prosperities with more hand traps, such as Ghost Mourner or Ghost Ogre or more Bestials, and that will put you at a better number of hand traps in your deck. You can also play Board Breakers instead, in which case I would recommend going to a 3rd Prosperity and playing at the bare minimum 3 Dark Ruler and 3 Evenly Matched, because those are some of the highest impact cards you can play. And then the rest is up to your preference. If you have access to talents, you can play talents. If you have Super Poly, you can fit in Super Poly. Now, in terms of the extra deck, the absolute core of this extra deck is Diabel, Silvera, and Arciela. Because you recycle these by shuffling them back into the extra deck, by bringing one of your tuners out from the grave, you don't need to play more of them. Gallant Granite, in my opinion, is an absolute fundamental core part of this deck. This searches Nibiru, and what you need to understand about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the things that makes a deck good is diversifying the locations that your interruptions come from. If all of your interruptions are monsters on the field, you lose to a single Dark Ruler, or you lose to a single Feather Duster if they're all spells and traps, etc., etc. This card allows you to have a searchable Nib, and you already can search... Oops, I just kicked an imperm out here. You also can search Veiler with the Arciela. So searching Nib and Veiler, the best possible combination of cards in the entire game, more or less in terms of hand traps, is extremely powerful because you have the only deck right now that can do that reliably. Appaloosa, you could debate, is one of the other core cards of this deck because there is a combo to make this on Summon 5. Again, I covered that in one of my videos. Same as the playing around Droll and Nib and other hand traps with Rafflesia. So this is also pretty core. The Zapper Shrimp, I think, is a pretty important part of this deck that you luckily can fit in. Now, this card is special summoned off of Diabel, and if it is special summoned, you can send a card from your hand or field to the graveyard, then target a spell or trap your opponent controls, destroy it. This will trigger the Tails or the Woes, so you can send those to get them back. This also will trigger the toy cards, so you can send those and get it back. That is optional, though. The real reason we're playing this is because this is also a Formula Synchron. It just has that bonus effect. And so what that allows us to do is a single Diabel can bring out the Zapper Shrimp, which can then turn into Satellite Warrior, which is the replacement for Chaos Angel. So if this card is Synchro Summoned, you can target cards your opponent controls up to the number of Synchro monsters in your graveyard. Now that will be at least 2, because you've made it off of Diabel and Zapper Shrimp. And then you destroy those cards, and this card gains 1,000 attack for each card destroyed, and that attack gain is permanent. So this makes OTKing on the crackback a lot easier. Now, Chaos Angel is better in the sense that being unaffected by monster effects and applying that to all of your synchros is a very powerful effect. And also, if you can make it with the dark so that your monsters can't be destroyed by battle, that is a super powerful effect. But Satellite Warrior can actually be more impactful in certain game states where you just need more spot removal. I also want to mention that Draco Berserker is probably the best generic Synchro 8 you can possibly make because it can be useful going first if you have like extra gas, or second because it helps OTK. Also, it happens to be a worm monster, which means that if you have not just Diabel but also Draco Berserker on the field, the Zapper Shrimp can turn the Draco Berserker, after you've used the effect preferably, into a Sinister Sovereign. Now this card is extremely powerful in a simplified game state. The main problem with Sword Soul is not that the boss monsters are bad, it's that the main deck monsters are bad. The extra deck monsters are still extremely strong. So this card says if your opponent special summons a monsters, except during the damage step, you can banish one of those monsters, and if you do, inflict 1,200 damage to your opponent. So this does not target. When your opponent activates a spell/trap card or effect, so that means they don't just have to have activated it, they can also already have face up a continuous spell or a field spell or whatever, and then they use the effect. You can banish that card, and if you do, inflict 1,200 damage to your opponent. And you can use both of these effects in the same turn. So, if your opponent is in a situation where they're like top decking, this card becomes super, super powerful. Now, Packbit and Vorpgate are very, very useful in the Yubel matchup, but you often have trouble fitting them in other variants that are taking up space because of the Fiendsmith cards or whatever. And so being able to play both of these, I would say, is pretty solid because there's space for it. Amritara is not the most important card, but if you are going first, you can side in the Reframing, which is an Omni-Negate that Amritara searches. I would not main this because it is a brick going second. You do not build your deck hoping to win the die roll unless you are stacking your dice. So do not main this card. Baguska is a lot easier to make in this variant because you're on 3 Sylvie and 3 Rusia, so passing on Baguska to a D-Shifter is easier to do. Rafflesia is super useful for beating cards like Droll and Nib. I would not main the search targets for it because they're bricks going second. But if you are siding for going first, you should put in the Gravedigger's Trap Hole because that's what beats the hand trap. And then you might as well put in another one so that if you have to use your Rafflesia in your turn, you still have another target for it in your opponent's turn. And you can replace the Time Space Trap Hole with like Bottomless or whatever else you want, but this one is pretty good because if they have like an annoying card like Mirror Jade, it won't trigger when it is shuffled back to the extra deck. Finally, we have a Legatia. Now, this debatably is a flex spot. If you have the Silhouette Rabbit, you can play it. I didn't include it because it is also one of the only other cards that is more than a few dollars. If you are going to play this card, I think that Azurune is probably a better target because basically everyone special summons, whereas the Silhouette Trap card, it doesn't negate in the same chain. It's a trigger negation, so you can't like immediately respond to negate something your opponent is doing. So Azurune is probably a better target, and you can definitely play Silhouette Rabbit. One of the good things about having a Link 2 in the deck is that after you've made your Gallant Granite, this card doesn't do anything, and so you want to turn it into something else, but you may not have enough materials for Appaloosa. So the only reason that SP isn't here, obviously, is because SP is expensive. So having a Link 2, any Link 2 that does something even moderately useful, I would say is very, very helpful for this deck. And the only reason I'm not putting in the Rabbit is just because it's more than a few dollars. If I had to choose what I would cut from here to put it into the main, I would probably put the Rafflesia in the side deck because the targets that it is searching are already in the side, so you can't use Rafflesia in game 1. I would put the Rabbit here. And then I think I would put the Azurune there, maybe. And if you felt awkward about a single evenly, although that's like fine, it doesn't impact your ratios if you were on breakers, and you really wanted to play, how is that card spelt? Silho. Silho. This card, I guess you could also put both in based on what you're facing. So you have a couple different options here. Okay, now let us look at some test hands. There are like a couple different things that you can do that are basically based on whether you have access to the toy cards or not. I tend to like starting with the LZ because it is very non-committal. They can't Imperm or Veiler it, but they can Ash it. And so if they Ash this card, you've at least checked for Ash. Normally, you would be adding whatever the Toy Soldier can't get you. So if you control Toy Box, the Toy Soldier can search a level 4 light, so it can get you either the Sylvie or the Rusia. But because we don't have Toy Box right now, we want to search this off of the LZ because that would be the extender. Then we can activate the Soldier, and the Soldier can then summon the Box because we don't control Box. And once you are in a position where you have Box, your resource game is way, way, way better. So you always set 2, even if you have access to them already. And here, what's cool is you can go for the Appaloosa on Summon 5 if you want. So here, we would get the draw off of the tank. Now, this is really important for the combo that the tank comes back here. And the reason that this is good is because you've now summoned 4 times, and if you want, you can go straight into the Appaloosa, and you haven't used your normal summon. Now, you could have done this using your normal summon, but then you would just need to have the LZ. So here, if we normal summon this card, even though we've already used Soldier, we got it for free off of the Toy Box. So now we can bring out a Sylvie, and we haven't used the Sylvie, so we can activate the Sylvie. And then you usually search the one that you need the most immediately because you don't know, like, forget about the Apo for a moment. You don't know if they're going to Imperm or Veiler you, whatever, here or like on the Arciela. And we definitely don't need the follow-up right now from Tails. We for sure need the Woes because that's how we're going to play in the opponent's turn. So now if we make the Arciela, we have a choice here of searching for follow-up or for the Veiler. Now, we already have Ash, Veiler, Imperm in our hand, so we have a solid number of hand traps. So I would say that it is probably better to search the Tails. And then obviously the Woes will trigger, and because we have sent a Speller Trap to activate our monster effect, the Asteria will come back. So one of the important things that you have to know is that you always want the LZ and the Esteller in your graveyard at all times because your resource game is based on cycling between these 2 cards. So now you go into the Diabelle because your Esteller came back for free, and you have the Diabelle here. And the cool thing about this is if you've used all of your resources from Toy Box, searching the Tails, not only is that follow-up on your turn, but it's a free send off of the Diabelle in their turn because you don't want to send the Woes, you want to use the Woes. And you don't want to send your Imperm because you want to use the Imperm. So at this point, you are in a position where you could bring out one of these cards, but there's nothing meaningful for you to go into right now. And so you could preemptively bring one out because you're going to need another body for the woes anyhow. But this plays a little bit harder into Nib in case they have like Nib Veiler or Nib Imperm and then you lose. So I would generally recommend that as long as you've gotten to the woes, you just keep your level 4 in the grave. And you could bring it out in the end phase or on your opponent's turn. So now if we were to pass here, this is just against the basic AI, obviously, because I'm just showing you some of the basic combos. If they activate a card or effect that allows us to use our Diabell, now we can activate Diabell and we can send the tails that we added. And for example, now this is where you have to make a choice. One of the most common things that you do in this deck is you bring out the Silvera, and you can bring that out and use the effect off of Diabell. You can shuffle it back off from your Arcia or your Sylvie, and then you can Woes and Synchro again because Silvera is not once per turn. So you can multiple times a turn Silvera. So you can do that. Something that's underrated is bringing out Arciella again because Veiler is not once per turn, and you can have as many Veilers as you want in your hand, which are all interactions that your opponent can't touch. They can't interact with. It doesn't matter if they have 7 Dark Rulers. They can't stop you using the Veilers in your hand. So this is a solid card to bring out. The Zapper Shrimp is probably the least used one. Now, I right here have quite a lot of follow-up because the Esteller will be able to bring itself back and the Tails is going to reset itself. So you have like really, really good follow-up at the moment. The Zapper Shrimp, obviously, like let's say we activate Zapper Shrimp and we want to bring out the Satellite Warrior. So we bring out the Satellite Warrior and we trigger that and we pop. It's whatever we want. So let's say we'll pop this and we'll pop this, and then the Satellite Warrior gains the attack, and you're in a super good position. You haven't even used the woes yet. You still have all these hand traps. You still have the Rusia in the grave, which can shuffle back the Diabell to bring itself out. So this is basically how you cycle through your resources. Now let me show you one other thing, which is you don't always want to go for, okay, so this is a bricked hand. In this case, you are sitting on 3 hand traps and hoping that you don't die. Which, by the way, if we're honest, like, because we're not playing a tier 1 deck, like, this stuff does happen. But at least if you have 3 hand traps and then you have like half of the hand to your engine, you should be able to play on the next turn. Or if you're going second, you have the 6th draw, which statistically is almost guaranteed to be an engine piece. But, you know, you are going to have hands sometimes that do look like that. Now here, I want to show you a different route. So instead of going for the Appaloosa, one of the really cool things, unless you've already drawn Nib, is to actually get the Nib. Now here we've already drawn a normal summon, but generally the Esteller is a better normal summon. So if we have the choice between which to normal, we're going to choose the Esteller over the Sylvie. So the toy box, the toy soldier triggers, and it allows us to get the box. And this is great because now we can cycle through resources because we can box every single turn. We will get cards from our deck because now we don't really need to draw these. Like, we don't want these to be our draws, so you might as well thin your deck as much as you can. One of the cool things that you should remember about this deck is that Tank is a super underrated card. So this card, which will, with the Esteller, we're going to special a Sylvie because we can't summon the one from hand because we've used our normal summon. So the Sylvie can search, and we want the Tank to bring itself out here. So the Sylvie will give us the tails because we don't have the tails. This card can replace itself with whatever is in your hand by tributing itself, or if you have box, it can bring out whatever's in the grave as long as it's not more than level 6. So this is a really good card to choose between what you need to be able to continue playing. Now this particular line, I'm not currently showing you how to play around the Nib or the Droll or whatever, because that's in my other video. But what I want to show you here is the Gallant Granite is useful because if you activate this, remember, so we have no hand traps, okay? We didn't draw any hand traps. So you detach a card, and you search the Nibiru, and here we make the Arciella off of these cards, and this will send, I can't remember if we used that already or not, to add, let's say, the Rusia, because we haven't used Rusia yet, and this will trigger the Woes and the Esteller. And so we bring that here so we can ladder. The Woes comes back. Now, before you make Diabel, always remember that you want to have something in your grave to add back. So I'm just going to use Tails here and search whatever. It doesn't really matter. Here, I'm going to search another Rusia so that when I make the Diabel now, there is a target in the grave and I haven't wasted my resources. And so I add the Tails back to my hand. And every single thing that you do here is about resources. Now, if you're playing the rabbit, this is what is really helpful, is that you have two monsters that can go straight into the rabbit. Another cool thing about playing multiple rank 4s is, let's say you go for the rabbit here, and I didn't put the card in the main deck for it, the Azurune or whatever. But we now can bring out, by shuffling back one of our monsters into the extra deck, one of these cards, and we haven't used the Rusia yet. So we can bring out the Rusia here. And obviously, like, you could make Appaloosa, whatever other link cards you have, you could make those cards. But I just want to show you that you also can still make a Rafflesia if you have the Rafflesia in your main deck. There's no real reason to make a Baguska here, but this is just to show you that you can very easily get these materials on field. The only thing that you need to remember is if you stick your level 4s on field and they're not in the grave, you're not going to be able to cycle through them in your opponent's turn. So, yeah. And also, if you are searching Nib off of the Gallant Granite, then unless you are forced to do otherwise, always search for the Veiler off of the Arciela, so you have the Nib Veiler in your hand, which is like a major insurance policy. So yeah, there are tons of stuff that you can do with this. In terms of like any closing thoughts I have, if you have ideas of stuff that is also budget that you can fit into the deck, you can let me know in the comments below, or you can join Discord and talk about it there. I will briefly mention the Millennium cards. So these cards are not super expensive. This card is, I think, like a few dollars, the Wedju Temple. And where is it? The Golem is a common, so it's cents. The only card that is a few dollars is Sengenjin, which is literally a few dollars. These cards are pretty interesting. I just made a video on the Millennium Engine, so I will not go into detail here. Watch that video if you want to find out. But they're basically free bodies on field that don't use your normal summon, that can also become spells if you need to have spells to pay a cost for a White Forest card. However, I think that their greatest utility is either in turning into Closed Heaven for a Fiendsmith line, or for getting into Synchro 12 plays using like Silvera, for example, and the Golem, which is a level 6. You can make Zolkin technically, so but I think playing the Crimson Dragon package with these cards makes you able to play the deck without having to use the Centurion cards, but I'm not including that because Crimson Dragon is not like super budget. So anyhow, this is my main take on the deck. You can play it with breakers, you can play the Millennium cards, you can make adjustments here and there to the deck, but I think this should be a good palette for people to follow. So thanks for watching.